Hello and welcome to another edition of the Blood Red Bulletin. This morning I'm joined by Liverpool.com editor Matt Addison. And Matt, obviously, the transfer window is in full flow now, and Liverpool, as we know, have made three signings already. But the general feeling seems to be that there won't really be any more. Not that that has stopped speculation, mind you, that Liverpool are going to buy more players. And we've seen recently that they've been linked with Sporting midfielder Matheus Nunes. And I know you've written an excellent article on Liverpool.com about Nunes. So what can you tell us about the player himself? And do you think a deal is actually realistic, even if we all kind of think that Liverpool are kind of going to wait a year for Jude Bellingham? So what's your opinion on this latest transfer link?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to say is that, we don't expect Liverpool to make any more signings this summer. Jurgen Klopp has said something very similar in Asia the last few hours. He's obviously been speaking again about Bellingham and was asked inevitably about the midfield, and he's given a very lengthy answer about why he thinks the midfield is the right balance, which I think is probably fair enough at this moment in time. But Matheus Nunes, I think, is an interesting one. He's a player that I've not seen loads of, but the bits that I have seen, I've always been impressed with him. I know Pep Guardiola was very impressed with him when City played Sporting in the Champions League group stages, sort of almost a year or so ago. He said he was one of the best players in the world or something like that, which, not like Pep Guardiola to make such a big claim, is it? But, I think there's definitely a good player in there. He's kind of I suppose a similar kind of midfielder to Bellingham, in the sense he's kind of a number 8, a box-to-box type player. One that you can kind of see that a lot of top clubs would be looking at. I think Manchester United, City, Chelsea, all the kind of big names have been thrown in there, as well as Liverpool with this report. So is there something in it potentially that Liverpool might look at? But are they going to do it this summer? Probably not. The question then is next summer, is he possibly a viable alternative to Jude Bellingham if he was to become too expensive? Possibly. Is there an argument even that Liverpool might need 2 next summer if they don't get 1 this summer? Potentially. Obviously, Milner, Oxlade-Chamberlain could move on, but I think then it kind of depends really on the progress of Harvey Elliott, Curtis Jones, whether Fabio Carvalho becomes a midfielder or whether he stays in the forward line. I think there's definitely a good player in Matheus Nunes, but are Liverpool going to go for him? I think it probably depends on a number of different things at this point. So, good player, interesting link, but it's not going to happen this summer, and it's kind of in the balance as to whether Liverpool might be interested in a year's time as well.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point there. In terms of we could see perhaps 2 midfielders next summer, because as you said, James Milner, his contract he signed a new 1-year deal, and you'd imagine he'll not get offered another one this time next year. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain is probably in the same boat. You imagine he will leave. Naby Keita, we kind of knows at this point what's going to go on with his contract situation, and obviously his injury problems kind of prevent him from actually playing a full season, for 90 minutes. So, and Thiago will be another year older, as will Jordan Henderson, so will Fabinho. So you maybe could be, right there. We could perhaps maybe see 2 midfielders sign next year, not just 1.
Yeah, it's something to think about, isn't it? I mean, to be honest, I remember sitting here last summer doing something very similar to this and saying, well, if they don't replace Wijnaldum now he's gone, then they'll probably have to do 2 next summer. And of course, they've not done any in midfield. I suppose Carvalho aside, they've not really done anything. I don't think we'll see a huge amount of him in the midfield 3, certainly in the sort of bigger games. I think we'll see him a little bit further forward this season, but it's a possibility. I think it does just depend on so many things that we just don't know at this moment in time. I think it's pretty likely that Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain will go on a free. Like you say, Milner, you'd imagine, would move on. There is going to be a little bit more movement next summer. I think the defence, especially now with Joe Gomez's contract, that's pretty much sorted. The attack, you've kind of got a little bit to think about with Roberto Firmino, but if Liverpool give him maybe a 1 or 2 year short-term deal, you'd think that that's pretty settled as well. But I think that there is a possibility that they might need to go and get 2 next summer. But yeah, like we say, it's kind of a case of wait and see what happens. We just don't know it at this moment in time, who's going to be there, who's not. And if they need 2, then maybe Matheus Nunes could be one of those, but probably wouldn't have him ahead of Jude Bellingham in terms of the priorities.
Yeah, and I think too, as you rightly point out, a lot of it kind of depends on how Harvey Elliott and Curtis Jones do. If they perform really well next season, then there might only be the need for Bellingham or one midfielder. Whereas if maybe they don't do as well, it could be a case of bringing in maybe an extra one and just
Yeah, yeah. And I think for me, Harvey Elliott's going to be a huge part of what Liverpool do this season. I think he's been slightly forgotten again. Obviously, how good he was at the start of last season. Curtis Jones as well. I'm a big fan of. So it wouldn't take much for it to click really for both of those two, and suddenly then Liverpool have not really got the four kind of options that you're looking at with the main three, and Keita as the kind of fourth option. You've then got a couple more. Carvalho, I think, is going to surprise a few people. They've got the depth and the options, I think, to go this season. But yeah, if it takes another season and Curtis Jones is still not quite clicked for him, maybe there's a bit of a decision to be had there. If there's another injury or whatever can happen this season for other players in that position. If Thiago has a season which is more like the one before last, you just don't quite know in terms of the priorities. But yeah, right now I think maybe one might be enough, but it could easily switch to being two by the time we get to next summer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one thing we do know for certain, it seems like Ben Davies is leaving the club. Obviously, the defender was left out of the pre-season tour to Thailand, and it seems that Stoke and Blackburn are linked with him, or at least in talks with him. What is your take on the Ben Davies situation? Obviously, it was an emergency signing, nearly 2 years ago now, and it was kind of an odd signing in a way, and the fact that he's never actually kicked the ball for Liverpool in a competitive game, he wasn't even really given one game, essentially. But do you think it was only just a matter of time before somebody came in with a permanent offer, and we were like, yeah, let's just move on?
Yeah, I think it was a no risk signing to begin with, wasn't it? It was one that Liverpool had to make. It was a bit of a gamble. If it worked, it worked. It didn't work in the end, but they're not going to lose anything. I think they might make a little bit of a profit on him. I think there's a bit of a sell-on clause, so some of that profit might have to go to Preston, his former club. But yeah, it's no real surprise that there's a bit of interest in the Championship, because I remember speaking to a couple of people when he signed, obviously hadn't really heard of him, hadn't really seen much of him playing at all. And they kind of said, well, he's one of the better players in the second tier. He's one of the standout centre-backs in the Championship, which makes it a little bit of a surprise that he's not really managed to do anything really in a Liverpool shirt. When you think of some of the players, it's no surprise when you've got everyone back fit again, and Konate has kicked on and been brilliant. But before that, you look at sort of Ozan Kabak was playing there. Reece Williams has got game time there. It seems pretty obvious that Ben Davies is going to go, and we don't know what's going to happen with Sepp Vandenberg, for example. It looks like he's kind of obviously gone on loan to Preston the other way as part of that deal and kicked on. It looks like he's now ahead of him in the pecking order. So, yeah, it's got to be the case that he moves on this summer. I think that, like I say, there's no surprise that there's 2 or 3 clubs in the Championship that are interested in him. I'm sure he'll go and move there and probably do quite well, to be honest. I think he is that level of player. He was never one for the long term for Liverpool. The worst case scenario kind of played out for him, but it's not a bad worst case scenario to get the move to Liverpool, train in those sorts of facilities, have that experience. Obviously, he would have wanted to play and play a part for the club, but yeah, it just didn't work. But like I say, there was no risk attached to it. They're going to make the money back at the very least, and they've not lost anything. They got themselves into the Champions League and did what they did. They've then obviously kicked on and got all of their players back last season. So yeah, it didn't quite work, but it doesn't really matter, frankly. It really doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably better for the player too if he gets a permanent deal. And obviously, going out on loan is not something that a lot of players want to do time and again. And obviously, it seems like he's that type of player that he's almost too good for the Championship, but not good enough for the Premier League. And you're kind of in that weird middle ground. And so you inevitably get more Championship teams making offers really than, say, a bottom rung Premier League side, which is kind of a weird place to find yourself in, because you obviously want to test yourself at the highest level. But if there's no real offers coming in from, say, the bottom 6 sides in the Premier League, you're going to have to really go back to the Championship.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only sort of disappointment from him. There was interest from Celtic. I think they were basically going to sign him on a free at the end of his Preston contract when Liverpool came in about 6 months before that. So I think that's probably the only regret, that he could have possibly ended up at Celtic. And obviously then there's the chance to play in Europe and all of the kind of things that you get with being a Celtic player. But yeah, I think he'll go back to the Championship, and if he goes back and settles, he's still young enough that move to Celtic or wherever else it might be could still come in the future. And obviously Liverpool saw something. Obviously the main thing was that they saw value and it was low risk and it didn't cost them much. But I do think there's a decent player in there somewhere. Liverpool haven't been able to see it. Whether he just wasn't quite the right character or the right personality in terms of being able to take that step up to a club as big as Liverpool. It's a big test, I think, mentally, in terms of having played for lots of smaller, sort of more maybe sort of family orientated type clubs and being in that kind of environment, to take that step and come to an absolute global club like Liverpool, I think is very, very difficult. But yeah, he'll go back to the Championship. His reputation, I don't think, has been particularly harmed by this. It's just one of those things. It's not quite worked, but I'm sure Liverpool will wish him all the best for the future.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself, Matt. And that'll do us for today's edition. Be sure to check out all the content on Liverpool.com from myself and Matt and others, and check out the Blood Red channel for all the latest audio and visual content. And we'll see you soon.